You are listening to UpTalk with Sean Conahan. The gloves are off, and it's time to have a chat.
Hello, people, and welcome to episode 15 of the UpTalk podcast. Thank you for joining me for these chats. I think you're going to enjoy it. First of all, as always, thanks to my sponsors, Life Shield Medical and First Aid Training out of Halifax. Awesome people, awesome training. Look them up. Dan's Son Photography. If you don't know who Dan's Son Photography is, you need to look him up right now. He is amazing. It is responsible for the cover photo for the podcast. Also, the Compass Rose Health and Wellness Center in Bedford, Nova Scotia. An awesome place, one-stop shop for everything wellness, including float therapy and counseling. Awesome people. Look them up as well. You'll see links on the podcast website, uptalkpodcast.com. Your one-click stop for everything UpTalk. Check that out. And as you may know, our title sponsor this year is Project Trauma Support. Really great program helping first responders, every branch of first response, help get over the moral injuries associated with PTSD. Look them up at projecttraumasupport.com. Big thanks to them. As always, trigger warning for the podcast if you have trigger issues, and obviously there's, within the conversations we're going to have, there are things you're going to hear which may bring up some memories and may trigger some issues for you, so make sure you're in a good headspace before you listen so you can get the most out of the podcast. I also want to touch on another issue, and that's language, bad language. There hasn't been a whole lot up to now on my episodes, but there's a little bit more in this episode, so I wanted to chat about it for a second. For me personally, bad language is not an issue. There's sounds that your mouth makes, and I really don't think much more about it. Obviously, there are situations, social situations, that you don't use bad language in those situations, but in normal conversation, it doesn't bother me at all, and I don't ask my guests to censor themselves at all or to talk any differently than they would normally talk. So you're going to hear some bad language. I hope that doesn't bother you, but you are going to hear it, and I just wanted to address it for this and for future episodes. On this episode, I have 3 great guests and what I believe to be 3 very powerful conversations. I found all of these conversations to be emotionally charged, powerful conversations from powerful guests that are doing a lot to try to destroy the stigma around mental health, mental illness, PTSD, especially with a focus on how it affects our first responders. So I think you're going to enjoy it. So without wasting any more of your time, let's get to it. My first guest on the podcast is Teresa Coulter. She is a Calgary paramedic and creator of Sock Drawer Stories. She's a phenomenal artist in using her talents to promote awareness about mental health. Really enjoyed this chat. I hope you do too. Let's welcome her to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Teresa. It is an honor to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to talk to you.
It's my pleasure, believe me. I have been wanting to get you on for a long time. Finally, the stars have aligned and get to talk to you, which I'm crazy excited about, and there's lots of stuff that I know we're going to talk about. I think that you're awesome, and after this, everybody else is going to see how awesome you are. So,
oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
I listen to you all the time. I love listening to you when I'm cleaning the house. It's just awesome. It's so interesting.
That's the first time anybody's told me that.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, where else do people listen to you? I listen to you when I'm cleaning the house. It's great.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
That's perfect. So for those of you, for those listeners that may not know you or who you are, can you give us a little bit of background on you?
My name's Teresa Coulter, and I live in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Mm-hmm. So close to the Rocky Mountains, but still in a metropolitan center. I've been in emergency services since 2000, so I've worked multiple different kind of places. I was a ski patroller for a while.
Oh, cool.
Actually went overseas to New Zealand and worked in the ski fields there.
Wow.
And then went up and did some industrial stuff to get my feet wet, and then started working rural because that's kind of the progression of this industry and career.
Right.
Got some time under my belt and then applied to work for a metropolitan center, Calgary.
And when would that have been?
I think I started working with Calgary 2009.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh. Awesome.
Yeah.
And, I mean, when did you was there a point where you sort of looked around, and when you were already, working in Calgary, or even before that, where you looked around and thought, there's an issue that maybe isn't being addressed, or, did you have any internal or personal things come up that you had to go through, or, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny because right out of high school, I went into this industry.
Right.
And I think when you're that young, you just take it all because you don't know anything else.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until what I call my worlds colliding that I actually noticed. And that was probably 14, 15. I have a big black hole in my memory surrounding those years.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of where I had some really severe behavioral changes, and it wasn't until somebody said to me, I don't think you're doing so good, that I was like, oh shit, okay, there's something else to do.
Did you listen to them when someone said that to you? Did you actually not blow them off?
No, definitely blew them off for sure.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So I had been, struggling a lot, like the classic things, I think, and I just had no idea that I was going down that dark hole, essentially, and getting in trouble at work, being like really kind of non-compliant. I started showing up late and not really giving a shit about it, and I'd drive to work and be like, I hate my life and my job, this job's just ruining, but had no root cause for it. It just happened suddenly. Oh, I'm walking around my house. I better sit because I might start ranting.
Okay, rant away. I totally endorse that. It's fine.
So this person at work that was part of CISM and had some mental health training under their belt kind of approached me. I knew at this point that something was wrong because I was starting to not do anything on my days off, and I would lay in bed the whole time, but I had no words to explain what those things were. It was just a progression, and I found myself in this really dark place. And I thought on the outside that I was holding it together, but I definitely was more irritated, and I think I wasn't as patient with my patients, and, I was rude, and I was, ranting and raving on the way to calls, like, this is such a bullshit call, blah, 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 blah. And, these kind of behaviors that weren't my normal. And this person came up to me, and I didn't know them that well, but knew of them, and they came up, and he said, Teresa, you don't seem like you're normal. Right. I think something's wrong. I'm here to talk, and this is my number when you're ready. And I was like, no, man, everything's fine. I just didn't sleep last night, or, the dog puked and I had to rush this morning, or whatever. I made a total excuse. And then, he said that to me, and it was really, what happened was, I thought that my exterior was bulletproof.
We all do.
Yeah. But he saw these changes in me, from my normal, and it shocked me, it shook me, and I went home and I cried. Well, I went into the change room and I cried as I changed out of my uniform. I got to my car and I started crying, and I hadn't cried for years. This was also something, years. My aunt had died, I never cried. I had called an old boss of mine when my family member died and was like, hey, is it normal that I'm not crying? Because my family's devastated. And he's like, yeah, it's just part of the job. It changes us. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I went home and I couldn't stop crying and shaking and was having a full-blown anxiety attack and was like, what is wrong with me? Like, why is this happening? Why can't I control this surge of emotions And so I called him, and we talked for a good hour. I think he tried everything in the book to try and bring me back down, and ground me, and nothing was working because everything was so distorted and my thoughts were just a mess. And so that's when he asked if he could set me up with a psychiatrist.
Right.
And so the day I was supposed to see the psychiatrist, the floodings in Calgary happened, and my house got flooded and condemned. So I was homeless at the same time as this was happening. Wow. And so that was really intense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long were you homeless?
I was homeless for about 6 months. I was couch surfing and working full time, and nobody knew the better. And I mean, I had a good friend who had brought me in for a large portion of it, and yeah, living with my dog, just kind of bouncing around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. And then I ended up, so the flood house, so this is after the pier had kind of intervened, right? So this was just the icing on the cake, I guess.
Yeah.
And I ended up going home one day to pick up the mail. So the flood house was still receiving my mail. So I went there and I pulled into the back alley parking spot, which was my normal pattern. And I'm walking through the backyard and I look over and there's a body laying there in the backyard. And I was like, this is just how, disconnected and disjointed my emotions were.
Right.
My reaction was anger. I was angry because I thought it was a homeless guy squatting in my house, drunk in the backyard, passed out. That was my original thought.
Yeah.
And so I went over and was gonna fight him. I'm in my civilian clothes and flip-flops, and I'm just so angry that this guy has ruined my day. An uncontrollable rage. And I walked over and I realized that he was my neighbor and he was dead. And he was obviously dead. So I looked around and he had been cutting the grass of the backyard of the house that he was trying to keep it nice and tidy while I was away.
Yeah.
In case I ever moved back in. But he ended up dying cutting the grass. He got electrocuted, actually.
Really?
Yeah. And so I called 911, but I must have been really eerie, I think. More calm than their normal calls.
Yeah.
And they ended up putting a hold back on the call and stuff like that.
Wow.
Yeah, because I refused to do CPR. But he was obviously dead. I mean, lividity had come in and stuff, so, yeah.
Yeah, and it's you do have some skills in that area.
Yeah.
You would know that.
Yeah.
Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah, so that was just the icing on the cake. But
yeah.
And then about 6 months later, I was able to, because I wasn't really paying rent, and so I ended up saving enough to buy a house. And so I bought a house, my dream house, with a little studio in the backyard. So I converted the garage into a studio, and that's when the healing started to happen, I think.
Awesome, because that's what I want to talk about next. So recently I went and saw The Other Side of the Hero documentary, which had a screening here in Halifax earlier last month. And then you had a little spot in it. And I got to see you and some of your artwork, and it's amazing, first of all.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I mean, so were you always artistic, or did you find this, or?
So after high school, it was a choice to go to art school, which I had an honorary acceptance for, or become a paramedic. And I followed my heart and strong recommendations by my parents, who probably didn't think artists could survive.
Yeah, they want you to make some sort of an income, so they don't want you to be an artist. Yeah, and I don't have any other family members. I have an uncle
who was RCMP or police,
Right.
RCMP, but no other family members are in emergency services.
Okay.
It's just me, really. Yeah. So I just took my EMR, went ski patrolling, had like some really gnarly traumas, and then took my EMT. And then after that, I don't know why I never took my paramedicine, to tell you the truth. I was really busy traveling, and maybe it just wasn't my calling, I guess. So, yeah, well, I stayed as an intermediate paramedic, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, well, it certainly is evident that art is your calling. I mean, and so you got this house and you set up this studio. And, and you started with. So how did it all get started? How did you start it?
So my tipping point call, not finding the dead body in my flooded house,
right, or
the flood house at all. My tipping call was actually, and I call it my worlds colliding. So in 2009, when I had settled into a full-time position here at Calgary, I decided I wanted to expand my knowledge, and I was an avid snowboarder and stuff like that and was good at it, but I wanted to get back into art. So I started taking some evening adult classes and just started painting a little bit, and I actually became a model for a painter. And so I would go and I would sit for him, and he would paint me. And so he kind of took me under his wing, or became kind of a mentor. He would share his theories and philosophies about art with me, and would show me some of the basics on how to paint figures and portraits and live objects. And so that's kind of my subject matter is live objects, not really from my head. And so I was really starting to get involved in the art community in Calgary and had lots of friends and was developing these really rich relationships with different artists in Calgary. It was the end of a really busy tour, and we were on a late call, which even sucks more. Yeah. So, you're exhausted, and we ended up going into this house. Yeah, that's about all I can talk about surrounding that. But in the end, this child died. So it was a pretty heavy case because it was all in the news and all of these other things. So we were 4 or 5 hours past our due date, our due time to be off. By the time we restocked the truck, got it back to the station, everything like that, and then finished the call and done all the police reports. So got home at noon and had been up almost 24 hours. I really wanted to go to this art show. So I was like, okay, I'm going to this art show. I don't care that I'm exhausted or whatever, just on autopilot. So I go to this art show, and everybody's really kind of quiet there, and I'm like, what's going on? And I was talking to one of the guys, and he's like, I wasn't even going to have the art show tonight because we lost a member today. Right. I was like, what do you mean we lost a member? And I'm trying to think, did somebody move away? And he's like, no, blah, blah, blah. And instantly I was brought back to the call. So not only 4 to 6 hours before this interaction, I had just worked the boy. Right. So that was where my worlds collided. I no longer had a safe place to be because my art community didn't know I was a paramedic or an EMT. So I was safe there to just be a normal person. And so all of a sudden there was this colliding of my world that I had tried to keep really separate.
That's such a good way to put it.
At work.
It's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah. So moving forward, every time I went out to some type of an art thing to just try and defuse or to become normal again, or, to leave work at work, it continued to follow me, right? Because these people would talk about it, and, they were, interacting as a community does, and I just had to stay silent because of FOIP. Right? I can't say anything about it.
Right.
So, and it's an ongoing investigation. So I don't remember those days off. I absolutely still have no idea. I don't know if I slept. I don't know what happened there. And I went back to work the next tour, and we get this call from infectious control disease, and they're like, you've been positively exposed to Streptococcus A and need to go on hardcore antibiotics for a month. So then that also collided my worlds, because I was scared I was infected and would infect my family and my loved ones. So then I started to isolate. And I didn't want to be around, my support, because I didn't want to make any of them sick.
Yeah.
And so even though I was on the antibiotics and all of that worked out and I never had it, I still felt like I was full of this toxic sludge. And it just kept going and going and going. Yeah, it just never stopped. I felt like I was always living in this element of, I don't know. It was weird.
Yeah, no, I get it, totally. Yeah, now, so Teresa, why do you think art is so good for mental health?
So where did the idea come from, and why do I think art is so good? So I was sitting in my studio, and, I was kind of on the other side, or started the healing process. So I had a counselor, and, I'd reconnected with my friends, and I was in this house, and I was, in a healthy, safe environment.
Right.
And I wasn't homeless anymore, and I was going to paint myself, and just going through the last couple months to try and figure it out. And a buddy of mine's like, why don't you paint your peers? And I was like, man, that's such a good idea, because our peers and our mentors, when we're dealing with this stuff, they've been through it, and they're the ones that can share with me the best way to get through it,
Yeah, absolutely.
Or, just by being around my peers, which I hadn't built relationships with, outside of work, because my outside work was to try and be that normal person. I was like, this is a great opportunity. So I sat down and I decided, okay, I'm going to paint a painting a month for the next 12 months, and I'm going to paint 6 men, 6 females, a variety of years in service, and my criteria was that they had to have a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, because they didn't know what it was at that time.
Right.
And that they had to have a counselor or a professional that they were working with, because I never wanted to be that element. I was more or less researching and trying to find out through their experiences and stories what it was, really.
I can relate to that for sure. I mean, that's the whole reason I do this podcast. So I know this is sort of my way of learning and talking to other people too. I totally get that. So, sorry, go on. So,
so the element of art, I think, our prefrontal cortex goes offline when we're sick. And that's funny where our language center is. So art is this really interesting thing of kind of still being able to express and release and move stuff out without having to have words attached to it. But once it's out and released, I think that all of a sudden the prefrontal cortex starts reconnecting, and you want to talk about it, whether it's the color usage that you chose, or, what somebody said about it, or whatever it is. Words start to develop, and it's kind of this alternative pathway to reconnect.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. That's awesome. I never really thought about that.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So this project you did, this is the sock drawer stories. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. So, sock drawer stories, and I had all sorts of names kind of pre-planned for the project, like painting paramedics pain and some stupid cliche things like that. And, you know, I was like, I'm not that, like, I'm serious, but I have a really dry sense of humor. So I was like, I can't do that. That's dumb. So, about halfway through, one of the sitters, was sharing his story, and he was explaining to me, like, his metaphor for what this stress that we accumulate is like. And he said to me, you know, Teresa, after every bad call, after every bad shift, we go home and we take up our dirty work socks. We roll them up into a ball and we shove them into a sock drawer. And then the next tour, bad call, bad shift, go home, take off these dirty work socks and roll them up and put them into that sock drawer. And then eventually, over time, if we're not cleaning those socks, that drawer gets so full that it can't close. Right. And it spills into our lives.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So right there I knew I had to call it Sock Drawer Stories, because all these people that were sitting with me were telling me their sock drawer stories, you know, like...
Yeah, well, yeah, you sort of touched on it. So what happens, like, when someone sits down, like, for a sitting with you and goes through this?
So, after the first sitter, I realized I was in way over my head, and so how I had reached everybody is I just threw a Facebook post out there and was like, hey, is there anybody interested in sitting for me with post-traumatic stress and are seeing a counselor? Which is kind of random to throw on Facebook back then too anyway.
Yeah.
But I had lots of people, and so I kept their names anonymous, but it's funny because it's their portrait, so, you know, that's also a really cool element about the project that wasn't planned, but
really?
I learned about, So my painting style is abstract expressionistic, and so these portraits are not exact replicas. It's not like a photograph of somebody. So when people, like, I'd post them on Facebook every month, and when I'd be in the hallway, like, everybody around me in the hallway was like, oh, you know, like, it's amazing what you're doing, and people were just starting to have a conversation about it. And it was just this flood of open door conversation, but it was a new way of talking about it, because it wasn't like, I'm suffering. It's like, oh, what's your project about, Teresa? Like, you're talking about mental health and post-traumatic stress? Like, oh, that's interesting, you know, this is what I kind of know about it, or whatever. So it was a less intimidating kind of backdoor approach to people being able to talk about it, because they didn't have to necessarily talk about themselves. And I think that's what art initially does. When you go out to an art gallery and you view it, you're talking about, like, oh, not necessarily your experience, but because it's there in front of you, but you are talking about it naturally from your own interpretation and perspective. So people would start searching. They'd be like, oh, it's blah, blah, blah. Oh, it's blah, blah, blah. Oh, it's blah, blah, blah. And I wouldn't say who it was.
Yeah.
But what was really neat was all of a sudden their minds were open to the possibility that it could be all of these people.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it was just fascinating. So, you know, our typical idea or stigma surrounding mental health,
right,
or who the typical person would be, all of a sudden in their minds when they're viewing these abstract portraits is opened, and it could be multiple people that they know.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was a really neat part for me to see.
So did you start off with the intent of the portraits being abstract, or did it just work out that way? It's
just my style. Abstract, expressionistic. I'm not a realistic painter, so it just naturally is what I do. Yeah.
Now, did you, only because I can't remember very well, but did you paint these portraits of the people in uniform or out of uniform?
I painted them out of uniform, and I did that intentionally because I wanted to show that we're humans. I wanted to show that our interactions with each other when we're in the uniform, we are still humans. we are still going to react. We are still going to have emotional responses. And that's important to know, that you are not Superman. Nobody expects you to be Superman. Yes, while you're in your uniform, you have a duty to perform, and that's understandable, but there's also this transition of being a human, and that's extremely important, I think, for people to know.
So it's one of the most important things to realize, that people need, especially ourselves, we need to cut ourselves a break. I am human, right? I didn't come from Krypton or anything like that. And, it's so, because that takes a long time to realize that, I am human, and it's okay. Not that I am human, because I know that, but it's okay to be human, and it's okay to break down. Yeah. It's okay to have the human issues that we all have, right?
Yeah. And life is about experiencing human emotions, and that's a rich life, is when we are fully engaged in being human.
That's awesome. So there are 12 portraits in the series. But there's 13 pieces of art. Is that right?
Yeah. So
how does that work?
Yeah, it's really neat. So a little bit about the experience of sitting. So I had taken a bunch of courses, and a lot of my courses were kind of developed through trauma-informed approaches, and mostly geared to yoga instructors, which is really funny, which I also am and became after the project. But
we'll get into that. All right.
Yeah. So I wanted my studio to be a safe place for people to come to. So I had taken a bunch of trauma-informed approach workshops and my advanced psychological first aid course and stuff like that for my own knowledge, in case I needed to implement it. So some of my trauma-informed practices we can get into after, but what I had, you would book a schedule with me and it would take 4 hours. So you had to dedicate 4 hours of your time to me, which is a long time to just hang out with one person outside of work. If you don't have, so they would come to my studio. And when you walk into the studio, I had 12, well, I actually had 13, but I had 12 all the same size canvases hanging on the studio wall, and they were all blank. And I just haphazardly had this other 13th piece on, which it's funny I didn't recognize to the very end, and we'll get to that 13th piece. So so people would walk in and be like, hey, okay, can you choose a blank canvas? Just whatever one you want. And they're all white. They're all identical in size. But some people really wanted certain canvases. Yeah, it was neat. And, it was interesting too to see how a bathroom stall for men, I don't have to pee standing up, but how one person will go to the left. Yeah. This is what the cartoons say. I'm not a man, so I don't know, but you go, if there's 3 stalls, one person goes to the left, and then it's really weird if somebody chooses the one beside you. Yeah. And that's kind of what happened with these portraits, because it was like they were very far apart. And then they started to fill up. Yeah, it was really neat. So you would sit in this chair. It's funny because I started to use breathing techniques and grounding techniques while sitting in the chair. That is just a natural part of being a model for a painter. So I would say things like, okay, now I want you to recognize where your feet are. I want you to recognize, where your legs are touching where your bum is touching on the chair, and where your back pressure is, and how your arm is. And I want you to focus your eyes on one specific spot, because they need to hold still for 20 minutes. Do you know how hard that is to hold still for 20 minutes?
I can't think it's easy. Yeah.
No, it's super hard, and especially for first responders who are just hyper in general. Right. But purpose was to get them to be inside of their body, to ground themselves. Right. And also what it did was, when I could see or sense that they were starting to escalate, or get wrapped up in a story, I would be able to be like, oh, you're out of position. Let's get you back in. Okay, remember where your feet were. Remember how you were sitting, and bring them back into their body. And so that was a really important technique that I used for some of the people that would sit for me. And so every 20 minutes the alarm would go off, and we'd get up and we'd stretch and look at the evolution of the painting. And, you know, they could share if they wanted, or they could just sit in silence the whole time. And I think that's really important to know as a support person, that sometimes it is just about sitting and allowing them to be whatever they need to be, or express whatever they need to express, without absorbing it as a reaction, right? It's called holding space. And I think that's important when you're dealing with peers, is sometimes you just need to vent. Sometimes you just need to sit. Sometimes you don't want to do anything. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So then how did this whole 13th piece come about?
Right. So in between each portrait, I would clean the palette. So where the wet paint is that I would mix to make the painting.
Right.
And normally I just scrape it off and throw it into the garbage.
Right.
But I don't know, for this particular project, I felt like when they were speaking, their words were landing on my paint. And it's like the paint, I was painting their disjointed thoughts and making sense of it in their portraits. And their pain was being written all over and telling a story through their expressions. So when I was scraping off the paint, I was actually putting it onto this blank canvas that was also on the wall, and just like super abstract, like a big like paint stroke here. And after, at the very end of the project, when I took down all 12, all of a sudden this really abstract 13th piece was front and center, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is all 12 together in one painting, and it shows unity, and it shows that we're all together in this, and that even though maybe our situations and traumas aren't exactly the same, we all share it, and we all feel it. And yeah, so
That's
this
amazing.
13th piece has to go with the show. Just has to.
And did you realize it was happening, or did you just not even realize it until it was done?
I didn't know till it was done.
Huh.
Till I'd removed all. And that was what was kind of cool about having all 12 or 13 pieces up on the wall. It was like, you know, in the caveman days, all of the caveman paintings are of their warriors when they come back from war, sharing their stories. So that's kind of what I think of my studio as. I was recording, I was that community of like listening and supporting and, you know, writing their stories onto the cave walls, essentially, through pictures.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, how have you found other people that have reacted to this?
So there's one story I'd love to share with you.
Go ahead.
So after the year, I had lined up a gallery showing at the University of Calgary, in their art department, and I think it was up for 2 weeks or a week. I didn't know this, but one of the occupational therapists in Calgary here in one of the OSI clinics, or maybe it was her client who was a paramedic with the city, was going through treatment for post-traumatic stress. And they actually came to the gallery show during like a low period time when nobody would have been there.
Right.
And they were there, and so this occupational therapist had brought her client, who was a paramedic, to this, or vice versa. Maybe he had asked to come to it with her.
Right.
And they walked around. He wrote me a testimony afterwards, which was just so fascinating, that him being able to see that he wasn't alone in these faces, like that the pain was written there. It was like what he was experiencing inside was written all over, like the masks of everybody he knew were removed, and there was this connection through vulnerability, I think. And he said that after leaving the gallery showing, it was a huge tipping point for him in being able to start speaking about his experiences. Up until that point, he was really resistant in the therapy and treatment.
So how did that make you feel when you get this kind of feedback?
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, number one, as an artist, it is probably the most amazing thing to have your art connect in a good or a bad way, to tell you the truth. I don't mind having people have really terrible reactions, like saying, oh, your art is terrible. Like, I don't mind that, actually.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's cool. You had an experience because
Right.
I did something. But to hear that
you still evoked emotion, or
yeah,
right.
And that's what's super cool. So, for people to be like, meh, it's not really a big deal, but for people to like sit and look and to absorb and to like go inside to see how they are reacting is such an honor. But also to hear a testimony like that somebody was able to connect, break and lower their walls, to surrender to help, I think is I am so proud of that strength and courage that they chose to do that,
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So not that you need to have other things to do, but apparently you do lots of other things. What else are you working on? What else are you doing there in Calgary?
So I actually just took a 0.5 position, so a part-time position with Calgary, so I only work half-time. So I've dedicated a lot of my time to art and just building up this. But I do R2MR. I became an R2MR teacher, and R2MR is the Road to Mental Readiness through the Canadian Mental Health Association.
Right.
Calgary rolled it out, I think we're maybe 6 months in now.
Okay.
Yeah, I was trained maybe a year ago and kind of took some administration time to set everything up.
Right.
So Calgary, the whole province of Alberta, because we're a provincial service, is offering it to first responders. Yeah. And I believe this is all secondhand.
Right.
So, but I believe that it's supported by the union because it's considered a safety issue, which is kind of an interesting way to look at mental health, you know, like, we're going to give you steel-toed boots to protect your toes. We're going to give you bulletproof vests to help with impact in case you get into a car accident. But, mental health is actually a higher disability claim. So R2MR is a fantastic program, I think, for starting the conversation and breaking down some of the stigma and kind of just getting your toes wet in what kind of things exist for support and mental health. But I think we still have a long ways to go to having a good pathway to care and, the financial side of it and those types of things. Yeah.
For sure. So you mentioned yoga. So
I'm also a yoga teacher.
I'm really interested in yoga because I know I've listened to a lot of different podcasts talk about yoga and how phenomenal it is. I have not ever done it and probably just scared to, but just like, tell me a little bit about what you do and your experience with yoga.
Well, I think you and I should hang out on a Skype and I'll do a yoga session with you.
I think that's like the most terrifying thing anybody's ever said to me.
But the yoga that I do lots of different types and styles, but the one that I really love that was helpful to me was restorative nidra. So you lay on pillows. So
awesome. I'm in. So far I'm there. I'm good.
Yeah, it's restorative nidra means like essentially you're activating your parasympathetic nervous system through breath work. It's actually really hard because when the body slows down, all of a sudden the mind starts speeding up. I'm continuously telling people that, in the Road to Mental Readiness, we teach, or they speak about, we go from 300 to 1,000 words per minute in our head. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right? And think about how, if all of those thoughts are negative, 1,000 words of negative a minute, like, that's too much. It's too much. So when we slow down the body in restorative yoga, the mind can often speed up. And so it's about learning to potentially see those thoughts and realizing and picking them like they're weeds. So you see a thought that's negative and you're like, oh, you're a thought. You're not happening to me right now. So, you can go back or go away. I need some peace right now. So it just gives you the ability to kind of slow down those 1,000 thoughts or 1,000 words,
right,
and start finding space between them.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, and then I started to really love yoga. I've practiced for a long time, but it was always for the physical side of it.
Right.
And it wasn't until I started doing Soccer Stories in the project that I started to find out other types of yoga. And one that's used down at the Boston Institute of Trauma in the States is called iRest.
Okay.
And it's based off of Yoga Nidra. And so Yoga Nidra is the ancient yogi thing, and it means sleep yoga. But iRest, which is, they've created a protocol so that they can study the effects of it in the usage of post-traumatic stress and depression and these things. And there's some cool studies out there. If you go into the Boston Institute of Trauma website, you can read a bunch about it. But they don't offer trainings here in Calgary, so I found out that the old yogi that they based it off of was Yoga Nidra. So I became a Yoga Nidra instructor, and I actually have a free meditation for sleep on my website.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's about 20 minutes. It's just breathing, some visualization techniques, a rotation of awareness through the body, just to help kind of bring you in and go from sympathetic into parasympathetic, and yeah.
Does that have to do with, I don't know a whole lot about meditation, but I did some meditation when I went to Project Trauma Support, and it was about getting yourself into this, like, alpha wave and beta wave.
Yeah, exactly what it is.
Really?
Yeah. So, Yoga Nidra, what the ancient yogis say is that 40 minutes of Yoga Nidra practice is equivalent to 4 hours of rest.
Really?
Yeah, and so I think that you would have to be a yogi for a long time doing Yoga Nidra every night before that could actually be brought on. But what essentially it is when we're sleeping, we're moving through these different waves, right? Going into REM. And when we are sleep deprived, or we have alcohol on board or some type of substance, or we are in post-traumatic stress or an acute anxiety disorder, we can't reach some of those levels, right? Our sleep is interrupted by nightmares, or our body can't even enter into sleep because it's still in its heightened state.
Right.
So what Yoga Nidra does essentially is it removes some of those waves, just brings the mind and the waves in a controlled manner where you can use it to activate some of that. And it's like breath work. There's this thing called polyvagal theory. I don't know a lot lot about it, but essentially what it is.
Some knowledge here. I'm going to tell you this for you.
Yeah, if there's some yogis out there. But on a long exhale, what ends up happening is our diaphragm contracts, and it stimulates our vagus nerve. Like, lots of people pass out because they bear down, right? So when you can slow your breath and make it even, and you can have this long exhale, what ends up happening is we're kind of attacking it from two ways. We're, minimizing the amygdala and the response by lowering our blood pressure, lowering our respiratory rate, and we're sending signals to our brain saying, it's okay, the body's not in a state of panic right now. So we can kind of start working that way. Yeah.
That's really cool. You sort of,
Kind of
I got
fun.
lost in what you were saying there for a second. You kind of left me speechless there. That doesn't happen very often. No, it's
So
so cool.
I decided to start a program called Yoga 911.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, so it was essentially, it's hard to go to a yoga class on a regular basis because of shift work for a lot of people. So I decided to run a program at 2:00 in the afternoon, which is enough time before a night shift and enough time to still get sufficient sleep and be able to get out of the house after a night shift. And so I called it Yoga 911. I only run it in sections. I don't run it year round. It's not a regular ongoing class, but there's lots. If you look into your community, I suggest trying to find a teacher that has some type of trauma-informed practice. That's kind of important. And what that does is you won't be kind of thrown into the whole yogi Sanskrit language,
right?
Which can kind of be intimidating for some people. So they use more common language, and they set it up with a trauma-informed approach and understanding.
Wow. Well, you know what? You sold me on it. We're going to have to get together and do that.
Yay! Nice.
Maybe I'll get Kevin Davison and some other guys from around here to do it.
I'll do a Skype. Let's do
awesome.
it. And you know what? Majority of people in my yoga classes have been men. Just so you know.
Really?
Yeah. Because they know the importance of it. The one thing I love the most about yoga, yes, physically, you become more flexible.
Right.
But you also start to become more flexible in your mind. And I think as alpha personalities or first responders, we tend to focus on the fix. How fast can I get to the fix?
That's right.
And that's just an element of our job, our training, our exposure, our life experience is like, all right, you need to be fixed right now. This is what I need to do to get you here, to get you this, right? Like, we're the fixers.
And I think that's what leads to, for me, that leads to a big downfall in my communication with my family, especially with my wife. This is not like I'm sure I'm not alone in this whatsoever, but she'll start telling me something, and I get a hint of a possible issue that I might be able to fix, and I'm totally not listening to her. All I'm thinking about is, okay, stop talking so I can fix it. Like, I can fix this right now, even though I have no clue. I really don't have any clue what she's talking about, and I'm probably wrong. And, but it's like, problem, fix it. Like, give me another one. Give me another one.
Yeah.
Like, and I just gotta slow down and listen,
So you need to become, well, I'm not saying what you need. I'm just
it's okay.
suggesting,
tell me what I need. I'm good.
No, I'm inviting you to participate in yoga. And the reason being is because you learn to become flexible with your thoughts as well. And when we can start to remove ourselves from the fixer and become more flexible in our thoughts and our perception, then we have more sustainability in life, and we can see when things aren't going well, and we can start adding more things, and it's expanding our mind and opening up to new things or opportunities or possibilities.
Sounds awesome. How can you argue with any of that?
Right.
It sounds awesome. So you mentioned it a little bit because you mentioned this website. So tell us where we can find you on social media. Give us all your stuff. Anything you want to give us.
Okay. Did I say 3 W's?
You didn't, but
3
we're going to
W's.
pass that. It's okay. We're going to roll with it. It's 3 W's. Okay.
TeresaCoulter.com.
Perfect.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of stuff on there. It's just a mix match of pretty much me. And then I'm also on Facebook, Teresa Coulter Artist, and on Instagram at Teresa_Coulter. And then Yoga 911, I'm always I try and keep it separate. The art stuff is the art stuff, and then the yoga stuff, whenever I kind of find cool articles surrounding yoga and people are interested in it, then I usually post on that. So yeah, Yoga 911.
Awesome. I'll post all these on the podcast website as well. And,
cool.
So anybody can go to get your links. That would be awesome. So, as you know, because you listen to the podcast, you've admitted that. So you know what I'm going to ask you next. So,
Yeah.
if there's people listening to this podcast, and or if you encountered somebody that was in the dark place, that you know what that feels like. I know what that feels like. I still battle it from time to time. If you could say something to those people or that person, what would you say?
You really put me on the spot here.
I should not have put you on the spot. You knew this was coming.
I totally knew this was coming, but I still feel like, and I listened to all of your things, and I was like, I have such a great idea. I should write that down in case I ever get to talk to him. Honestly, to tell you the truth,
Yep.
I think the first step to healing is asking for help. And as the helper, it's so hard to see ourselves in a situation of needing help because we're the fixers, right?
That's right.
And we wear that armor, and we think that the world doesn't know that we're just so full of toxic sludge inside.
Yeah.
So I think even if your words are disjointed and you don't know how to explain anything, or, just ask for help. There's a lot of resiliency and strength and courage that it takes, but it's the first step to healing, and it can come at any time. I think wherever you are on your journey, don't do it alone. You're not alone. There's so many people that care.
Well said.
I hope so. I hope that did it.
Perfectly said. Could not have been said any better.
Good.
But Teresa, I really enjoyed this. I know we could talk probably for hours, but
yeah,
our listeners may not like that, but I would love it. But I think you're awesome. I totally am in awe of your artwork, because it's something that it's just something that I have never done, or I've never been in that world. So when I see good artwork, I have, a few tattoos, and I have, even when I see any kind of art like that, it's just, I'm in awe of it. And it's so amazing to watch an artist do their thing. And I think you're awesome. I think that you are one of many people, even, just in our country alone, you're one of many people who are at the forefront of this awesome community of mental health support, especially amongst first responders. But we know it's not a first responder problem. It's a human problem. We just happen to be first responders. That's our background. So tends to be what we focus on. But, I love you. I love what you're doing. I'm such a fan. I'm just a big fan of yours.
Well, I'm a big fan of yours too, You're pretty epic. I think the reason why I love your podcast so much, and I hit on it a little bit earlier, was, what's really fun about them is it's just like, you're constantly interviewing all of these people from all these different areas, and I think you're just giving a wide range of possibilities for people. You're opening that door to, hey, check out this. Hey, check out this. This might work for you. Because everyone's journey is going to be a little bit different. And, art isn't going to heal you, but can art be a part of your healing journey with like a counselor and a psychologist? Absolutely. Right? Or maybe you're into yoga and you want to add that into, and, trauma support program, like, that's super cool. Maybe that's what you want, right. And you just want to get away and go somewhere for an extended period of time and really dive in deep, So,
well, I think it's important to get as much information and as much different information from different resources in different mediums as you possibly can. I think it just, you're better equipped.
We're just normalizing the conversation. Yeah. I mean, people used to die from infections, and now, we have antibiotics, we have wound care cleaning, we know not to put dirty rags on open wounds, we know, and mental health should be treated exactly the same.
Absolutely.
Mental health is an illness or an injury, and the sooner you get to it, like the sooner you get to a cut, the sooner it gets better. And then it's about maintaining that and checking in with it all the time. And, That's
Awesome.
just it.
You're awesome, my friend. Thank you for taking the time. I gave you like 30 minutes notice for this chat. Some time came up, but so I thank you for, getting everything together and getting yourself in a place where you could do it. And if there's anything we can do or I can do or the podcast can do, if you have anything new coming up, you want to chat about it, please reach out because, you're part of the UpTalk family and a really important part of it. And I thank you very, very much for coming on.
I had a lovely conversation with you, and thank you for doing that. Yeah, I'm stoked. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. You take care of yourself.
Yeah, and maybe someday we'll get my Sock Drawer Stories artwork out east.
Oh, can't wait.
In a gallery. And
I'll tell you what's going to happen when you come out east, a bunch of things, but you're also going to get you into a float session here.
And, I'm really excited about that.
Yeah,
that sounds
we're going to do
cool.
it. So definitely get out here if you can. Until we speak again, please, just take care of yourself and all the best to you and yours.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
It was an honor.
My pleasure. Honor's mine. My next guest is Jessica Hoek, again a Calgary paramedic, creator of Prairie Sky Equine Assisted Therapy, a very active mental health advocate for us as first responders and for humans in general. Really great chat. I think you're going to love her. I know I love her. So let's welcome her to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Jessica. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is my pleasure. Absolutely. I've been trying to get this together with you for a while, and it's been totally my fault that we haven't had it happen yet, but I'm glad that we're finally getting it done for sure.
Yeah, me too.
So for people who don't know you, maybe just give us a little bit of your origin story, sort of, what makes you, maybe up to the point where you became a paramedic.
Well, I grew up in a small farming town. I decided to become a paramedic after I had a slightly traumatic experience with my father getting really sick when I was about 12.
Wow.
The fear of not being able to help him and him being extremely sick. He actually had a traumatic leg injury that ended up causing him to have a PE.
Wow.
And we lived super, super rural, and it was a volunteer ambulance service. So I remember waking up very early in the morning and hearing my mom crying and hearing my dad's friend show up and just sounds of frantic movement upstairs and just being terrified to go up there because I didn't know what I was going to see.
Yeah.
And then hearing the sirens come up the driveway and hearing the wheels go across the floor and just feeling so incredibly helpless. Mm. And that 12-year-old kid, I promised myself at that time that I would never be in a position again where I couldn't fix whatever came to me. So that's actually my motivation to have become a paramedic. So
yeah, absolutely.
So I became the person that I needed when I was a kid.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It makes total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely does. And so did you go into paramedicine right out of high school then?
Immediately. 18 is when I started because you had to be 18 in Alberta to do your EMR. So I did my EMR EMT and got a job 2 weeks out of school in northern Saskatchewan, which was quite the experience. And so I've been doing it full time since I was 20 and I'm 37 now. So looking at 17 years of working basically full time. So yeah.
Huh. Now, at what point in time, obviously there must have come a time, did you notice at some point that there was something wrong or that something needed to be taken care of? You know what I mean? Like emotionally?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Here's the part where I kind of got lost. Okay. I was really, really, really angry. I went from being a pretty happy-go-lucky person that really enjoyed my job to slowly starting to slide down the scale of being very, very angry. And unfortunately, because of the culture that was in EMS at the time, it was perpetuated because anger was the only acceptable emotion that you were allowed to show.
Right.
You weren't allowed to be sad. You weren't allowed to be scared. And even if you were happy, that was sort of, you know, that was questioned by people. Like, people were very quick to be like, well, you shouldn't be happy. This is, you know, this isn't a great job and all these bad things are happening. And, you know, like, so anger was the only acceptable emotion. So that was sort of my thing, was like, I'm just really, really angry. And I'm really, really tired all the time. All I want to do is sleep, and I don't want to be around other human beings, and I don't want to go work out. And I just, for me, it was I just wanted to turtle all the time. And like I said, anger was the only thing I expressed. So I think I knew something was wrong when I was realizing that I was starting to rationalize behavior that shouldn't have been rationalized.
Right. I mean, did your family or friends say, would they say anything to you like, hey, what's up? This isn't you? Or
yeah, I think a couple of my coworkers noticed that I had become extremely empty, like just vacant. There was really nobody emotional inside, right? I was just kind of going through the motions. There was either that or I was really angry, and they could see that those were the only two things that I was presenting with: super, super emotionally vacant or really angry. And I think they were, you know, I had a couple people pull me aside and say, like, listen, I think something's up with you and you might need to take some time off. But I had no idea what was going on. I really didn't. I just thought if I could just sleep for 6 months and I could just be left alone and not have to deal with anybody else's problems, I'll be okay. I really, truly had no idea what was wrong with me.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what happened that made you come to the point of, you know what, like, enough's enough, I have to figure this out?
Well, so you remember how I was kind of saying that you start to rationalize behavior that shouldn't be rationalized?
Right.
And you know that this isn't normal, but at the time you're just like, I've been through so much that it's acceptable. Like things like joking about getting stabbed at work so that I wouldn't have to be there anymore. And I wasn't the only one. Like there were a few of us that were like, well, you know, maybe something bad will happen to us and we don't have to be here anymore. And so you start engaging in risky behavior.
Right.
One, because you're completely numb to everything. So you really actually don't care if anything bad happens to you. And two, you have, you know, you're so numb that you're almost looking for something to make you feel anything. Because you're like, I feel nothing. Like, at the time, you could have put a gun to my head and I would have just smiled at you because I had no fear response to anything. I had no happy response to anything. Like, I was completely, like I said earlier, emotionally vacant. So it was that. And then my very last night of work really was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. I was fully ready to, you know, I felt like someone had done an injustice to me that they weren't going to have to pay for. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to beat the crap out of this person. And I'm okay with going to jail for it because it means I won't have to be at work anymore. So if this person engages with me at any point in the evening, it's going to be a done deal. We're going to have blows. I'm going to fight for as long as I can. And then I'll go to jail. I'll get a lawyer. I'll handle it. But this person's going to have to pay for putting me in a position that I felt was, at the time, way more than I could handle. And I knew that it had, like, something had snapped in my brain. And I was like, I'm not okay. And it's his fault. And he's going to pay for it. And I knew that having worked so hard to be a good paramedic and having taken a lot of pride in my actual paramedic skills, I said to myself, Jess, you've worked so hard to get to where you are. You've spent so many years on education and so many years on experience. And you've always provided good medical care. You might not have been nice to people doing it, but you've always provided good medical care. Is this how you want your career to end? And it was like, no. So you need to go home and you need to not come back until you're okay. And that was my last night of work.
So what did you do when you left? Did you immediately go to your doctor? Did you, what were your steps when you left? I had a 3-day migraine. That was really fun.
Wow. So I ended up going to the doctor because of that. I'd been having frequent migraines that were lasting days on end and they were debilitating. So I'd gone to him for that. And I booked off sick and I knew I was going to need a doctor's note. And so I explained to him kind of what was going on, that I was having these really, I would say, aggressive tendencies, right? Like my reaction to people to deal with them was like, well, let's just fight then. There was no, let's talk it out and we'll both feel better in the end. My reaction to people threatening me was absolutely like, I'm going to take you out before you do anything to me. And I know that, obviously that's not a normal, healthy way to be. So he said to me, if I'm going to write this sick note for you because you're having, we'll call them mental health issues,
right.
I want you to see a psychologist. And so that's how I got started down the road to actually getting a diagnosis and understanding what was wrong with me.
So how long did it take you to get a diagnosis after that?
Well, I went in and I got an appointment with a psychologist probably 2-3 weeks after my initial sick book off.
Right.
And I think it was the very first time he sat down and talked to me, and he was like, do you know that you have PTSD? And I was like, no. I'm just really angry and tired, and if I could just get some sleep and not have to take care of anybody else, I'll be fine. And he was like, no. It's not as simple as that. Let's talk about this. So he explained to me what the symptoms were, right. And it was like a light bulb, because I was always led to believe that it was one traumatic event.
Right.
Right? You had this one super traumatic event. You knew that something was wrong with you, and you went and got help. And I had no idea that PTSD could be a chronic injury, that it could be layers and layers and layers of stuff. Or like the other night I was talking to my partner, it's all these paper cuts, right? All these little paper cuts that chip away at your resiliency. And eventually you bleed to death, and you don't even know you're bleeding to death because it's all these little cuts,
Right.
It's not a big one. So that was a real eye opener for me, because it didn't look the way I thought it would, and it didn't feel the way I thought it would.
No, it totally makes sense. It's kind of like what they say about, the frog in boiling water.
Yeah.
If you try to put a frog in boiling water, it'll jump right out. But if you put it in cool water and turn the temperature up slowly, it won't even realize it's getting hot.
That's exactly what happened to me.
No, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look around now too, how many people do you know? How many peers do you know that have those symptoms, anger and just want to sleep?
Oh, lots. Lots and lots. And I see that now, because one of the biggest lessons that I've learned through all of this is that anger is sad's bodyguard. So when I see anger is sad's bodyguard.
Wow.
Yeah. And when I heard that, it was so profound, because it hit like an arrow in my chest. I was like, holy cow, that resonates with me 100%.
Yeah, that just hit me like a wall when you said that. I've never heard of that. Huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
and so I see it. I see it at work, and then you hear people, and I'm just as guilty of it. Like, God, that guy's an asshole. Nobody wants to work with him because he's such a jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I have to think to myself, like, Jessica, you can't judge that person because you have no idea why they're angry. You don't know if that's just their personality or if they're actually really sick. So, yeah. But I definitely recognize it in people.
So, I have a bunch of things that you had sent me earlier, things that you wanted to maybe talk about. Mm-hmm. So, I'll hit on some of them. So, you wanted to talk about financial stress.
Yeah.
So let's go into that, because that's something that we've all felt. I know I've felt it.
Yeah.
What was your, experience with that?
Well, here's the thing. Nobody wants to talk about financial stress because so many people have their ego and their self-worth and their self-esteem directly attached to their ability to look after themselves financially.
Right.
And when you can no longer do that, despite your best efforts, you feel worthless. Yeah. You feel like everything that's happening to you is your fault.
Right.
And that you must have made bad decisions that have led to you being where you are. Because that's what other people tell you. And I mean, I've had some people that I thought were really good friends of mine say that about me behind my back. She's in financial distress because she makes poor decisions. She's a bad person. It's like, none of those things are true. But when society has such an affiliation of your financial worth attached to your worth as a human being, you believe it, right?
Yeah, absolutely do.
And when you're already feeling horrible, it's overwhelming. And one of the things that I think is happening is that people are getting into financial distress, we'll say, because of divorces that they're going through because of PTSD, right? They can no longer be in a marriage with their spouse and they're getting divorced, and those
Right.
are very, very expensive. I know for myself, personally, my experience was that I went on disability and all of a sudden you're making quite a bit less money.
Absolutely.
Right? So that gets
No
the ball
overtime,
rolling.
no overtime pay.
No overtime, no shift diff, right?
Yeah.
And so that gets the ball rolling. And then when I tried to come back to work, I was essentially told, and I'm not going to speak about who my employer is or who said these things because
Sure.
I like to keep the job I have at this point, but
Yeah.
I was told that my PTSD was not a legitimate health concern and did not require a modified work schedule.
Wow.
That myself and my doctor were requesting. So I was told that I had to come back to work full time or I could drop down to the casual pool. And at the time, I knew that I would relapse immediately if I came back to work full time.
Right.
And I just spent a year on disability and I needed to do it, but it was awful. And I didn't want to do that again, right? I didn't want to go back on disability. I didn't want to live on that paycheck. I didn't want to be jumping through the hoops and taking the meds and feeling like I had no control over my life. So I had to drop down to the casual pool. So there was another hit.
Right.
Because now I don't have a regular schedule. Now I don't have benefits. Now I don't have a pension. And then, with the PTSD, I mean, I will say that my ex-husband is a fantastic human being and one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. But the PTSD took a massive toll on our marriage.
Right.
And I don't want to say it was one person or the other, but let's just say that there was no understanding between the two of us about what was going on.
Right.
And so getting divorced was yet another hit to me financially. And that just kept going and going and going. And eventually you get to the point where you're like, wow, I've spent my whole adult life looking after other people and I can't even financially take care of myself. And it gets to the point where you can work as many shifts as you want. You can do all the right things. And it's just, you're so far down the rabbit hole. There's no getting yourself out of it. And I think the hit to your self-esteem is so massive that alone is hard enough to get out of. But when you have the threat of having your home taken away from you, of, having people constantly calling you for money that you don't have.
Right.
I truly think that if you look at some of the people that are really, really struggling or that have committed suicide in the past, I wouldn't be surprised to see that there was a financial component to the amount of stress that was going on because
for certain.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, how humiliating is it to have your house foreclosed on? Because
That's right.
people judge you for that.
That's right. I mean, just to let you know, I know exactly how that feels. My family, we went through this because of my, all of a sudden not having that, the good money that I was making and the overtime. And, and we ended up, we lost a house. We lost a vehicle. It was a hard hit to take, and I carry that guilt with me even today.
Yeah.
And, there were times when that was all happening that, I was in that dark room just justifying the fact that, everybody would be much better off if I just wasn't here.
Yep. That's 100% what I thought.
And totally tied to this whole financial burden and the expectation that, especially stereotypically of me being the quote-unquote man of the house, that I'm supposed to be able to take care of my wife and daughter. And if I cannot do that, what use am I?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. I will tell you that is absolutely thoughts that have gone through my head that if I'd had a life insurance policy, that I would have done it. So that, because I could not see a way out. I mean, I've had my house foreclosed on twice, and twice I managed to get out from underneath it. I've had my truck like a week or 2 weeks away from being taken away from me.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how ignorant people are when they offer you advice.
Yeah, that is true.
Or the judgments that they make. They're like, why don't you just sell everything? And like, I was trying to sell my house. It took me a year and 3 months to sell my house.
Wow.
Because of the market the way it is in Calgary.
Right.
I sold basically everything I had that was worth any value to try and just keep myself going just 1 week longer. And I literally lived every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks I'd have to go back and make all these phone calls and renegotiate, paying all these people off. And I really had no idea how I was going to do it. And I was like, I can't see a way out of this. I just can't. it's too much. And,
Yeah.
you know, I think back to all the times that I've been severely suicidal to the point where I was doing something about it.
Right.
It wasn't that I was out of control, or it wasn't like a reaction to something that was going on immediately. What it was purely fatigue of being so tired of trying to fight to have a better life and to get better, and just feeling like I was just meeting nothing but resistance, and that everything I was, it is. And I was just so tired. I was like, I have nothing left in the tank. I can't keep fighting because I just have nothing left, and I can't just lay in bed, because eventually they're going to come and they're going to physically remove me out of my own home that I spent years trying to keep.
Yeah.
I'm going to have no vehicle to get to work. I'm going to have no food to eat. So I have to get out of bed and do something about it, but I am too tired. I've got nothing left. And I've said it to people, you know, if you hand me 2-3 problems, I can deal with it. But when you hand me 2 or 3 problems for years and years and years, every single day or every month, it just feels like things keep coming at you, and it's relentless. There's no break from having bad things happen. It feels like.
Yeah, and when we were working as paramedics or as any kind of first responder, when we're on the job, for the most part, we can solve. We're superheroes. We can solve any problem that comes to us. But then off the job, when we're off duty, these problems just seem insurmountable, and we have just can't figure it out. Like, we just can't put ourselves in the right position, or let go of our egos, or to enough to say, you know what, this is the path that needs to be done, and this is the only way to get better. We just, for some reason, can't figure that out when we're not working.
Yep, absolutely. You know? And we're so hard on ourselves, right? And like you said, ego is a huge thing. Like, I've had to have a serious conversation with myself about what decisions I make based on my ego and what is based on my brain or my heart intelligence. And having to let go of my house and sell it was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make. I fought and kicked hard to not have to do that. And I realized I don't have a choice, you know, but I feel like, and I think a lot of people can resonate with this, is that when you have all these things happening, it just feels like a snowball. It feels like more bad things just continue to happen. And despite your best efforts and despite the good decisions that you try and make and how hard you try and work, it just feels like you can't catch a break. And I think that that's the most defeating feeling, because if you at least got something good happened, you could grab onto that and be sustained for a little while and feel like you're making progress in the right direction. But when you feel like nothing's going right and everything you touch turns to shit, like I always joke, I have the opposite of the Midas touch, you know?
Yeah.
Instead of gold, it turns to shit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I can relate to that for sure.
Yeah. And it's just like nothing you do is ever going to fix it. And you really do start to believe that your life will never get better, that it will always be bad and it will always be dark and you will always be poor. And you will always have these demons riding your back, and that it's never going to get better.
But it does.
It does.
If you will. It does, and you don't know when that's going to happen, but it does happen. Now, talk to me about addictions. You want to talk about addictions? Yeah.
So I was extremely judgmental of people with addictions as a paramedic. I always thought that because I'd gone to school and gotten educated, and I worked my ass off, because my childhood was fairly traumatic.
Right.
And, you know, I always felt like I could easily have been one of those statistics. I could have easily gone down that road. So to me, it was like, well, if I could overcome that and get a good education and get a good job, why the hell couldn't you? Mm-hmm. And it was purely being naive to the world that made me feel that way, and made me think that way and act that way. You know, I like I said, I was super judgmental of people with addictions, and if I'm being totally honest, even today, to this point, I still am to some degree. Yeah. But what I learned is you don't really know what you're going to do until life kicks your knees out from underneath you.
Yeah.
You can say I'd make all the right decisions. I wouldn't drink. I wouldn't do any of these things because I'm a good person and I make good decisions. And then life takes your knees out and you go, you know what? No, I don't make all the right decisions all the time. And 100% had a drinking problem without question for probably 2 years. Really? As a result of everything that's happened. And, you know, I can speak to the fact that it's a slippery slope. It's not something that you go into intentionally saying, well, I'm just going to be a drunk because why not?
Yeah.
You know, it's a coping mechanism, right?
Right.
For me, it was none of the meds worked for me. None of the treatment that I was getting was creating a fast enough change, an immediate, you know, feeling better, I guess you could say. Like I needed something to make me feel better now when I was having a bad day. And I found that alcohol took all the sharp edges off my life. But that having that being in a traumatized mindset also made me extremely prone to drinking way more than I ever had in the past. So, you know, I could have 4 or 5 beers in the past and be totally fine and be like, yeah, no, you know, control of myself and no problem. But I found in that depressive state that I was in, I'd have 4 or 5 beers and I would black out.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. It was like a little man was in my brain and he would just hit a switch. And it was like 1 minute you're fine and 1 minute your lights out. And that
So how long did that go on? How long did you, I mean, I know it's always a struggle, but how long did you really struggle with that?
About 2 years.
Right.
And here's the interesting part. This was well after treatment and diagnosis. So I started to get better and probably had a good year and a half.
Right.
And then I got divorced, and I think that was just sort of the tipping point for me. And so I relapsed, which wasn't something that I was expecting to have happen. I thought that if I was going to relapse, it would be because of something that happened at work.
Yeah.
And, right?
Yeah.
So I had this massive relapse that was almost worse than the initial having to be on disability for a year. And it was way worse, actually, if I'm being honest about it. And it totally surprised me because I wasn't expecting it. I thought I was getting better.
Yeah, I mean, I recently had an episode like that as well. I thought, you know, I'd gone through all my things and everything was fine, and a lot of my issues stem from my work as a communications officer, and I got this little part-time, this little sort of second job at a little message center here in Halifax, and taking, you know, totally compared to what I was used to do, is totally non-emergent, like not, you know, life or death like I was used to. And I started doing it and started training it, and I found that I all of a sudden, after about a week and a half, I sat back and went, oh my God, I'm angry. I'm really anxious. I'm really short with my family. I am having like cold sweats and nightmares. And I didn't see it coming. It was a total surprise to me that would bother me. But it obviously triggered something, and I had to actually have a talk with my wife, who was a trooper. You know, how she's still here, I have no idea. I had talked with her and said, look, this is, you're not going to believe this, but this totally benign job is going to hurt me. It's going to put us right back to where I was when I didn't know that there was something wrong. And so I had to walk in there and have a conversation with them, like, I love this job and I'm really good at it, but I can't do it. I can't do this, and I had to leave. And totally blindsided me, but taught me a good lesson, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me too, because I learned a lot about being an addict, how people that are under the influence of alcohol, you know, you get them in the back of the ambulance and they're absolutely horrendous, and you believe that that's really that person, and they've pissed themselves, and you're like, how could you possibly have pissed yourself? Right. Like, how do you not know? How do you have no control over what you're doing? And I would take it personally when they were behaving badly. I would take it personally when they called me names and they were fighting with me, because I thought that was them.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I had it happen to me several times where my friends were like, what the hell was wrong with you last night? And I hear the things that I would say. Yeah. And I was like, holy cow, those aren't even thoughts that cross my mind when I'm sober. Like, that's not even a thought I've ever had in my entire adult life. I can't imagine that I would have said that to somebody. And I realized that was the darkness. That was all of these years of pushing down all of the darkness and thinking that there was going to be no consequence to that. and always feeling like I had to hold myself to a higher standard of behavior and think better thoughts and have better actions and make better decisions than the rest of the public did, it developed this complete alter ego, the exact opposite of all of those things, which was having really bad, awful thoughts and saying really mean, horrible things to people. You know, this very dark entity that just sort of floats at the very bottom of my psyche. Alcohol would take away all of the things that are blocking that from coming out on a day-to-day basis, and it would just run rampant. And I would have no idea till the next day when people would tell me the things that I had said, and I was like, oh, wow, I'm beyond ashamed of myself. And so now you add another layer
Right.
to all of the other things that are going on, right?
Yeah. It just piles on, it seems.
It does.
Just when you think
You
that
lose
you're at the
friends.
top, there's like a whole other level.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. A whole other level is exactly it. And I was not expecting it.
No.
And it threw me for a loop, for sure.
So you obviously there came a point when you realized that, and so you went and obviously you conquered that.
Yes.
And so how long has it been now are you totally sober now?
No.
No, but you're able to moderate.
Oh, absolutely. It's been probably about, I would say, a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I think what it came down to is I had to keep hitting rock bottom. And that's a really painful, awful place to be. But I also think that making tiny little bits of progress are sort of also what helped me stop doing it. I realized, like, I can't be that person on the street living at a homeless shelter. I can't be that person that's thrown away all of the hard work that I've done. You know, like, despite everything that's happened, I've actually accomplished a lot in my life, a lot of things that I'm really proud of. And I just couldn't throw all of that away to be a drunk because it wasn't getting me anywhere, you know? Like, it finally I got tired of it. I think that's really what happened. I just got tired of it.
So what are some of the things now that you do to maintain yourself? Like, what, you know, to keep up, to keep going? What are some of the things that you found that help you?
Well, one of the biggest things, and this is going to sound kind of a little bit contradictory, because at the time that I was going through the worst of the stuff, I didn't want to be around other people, and I was too tired to engage in physical activity.
Right.
But one of the things that's absolutely kept me grounded is working out, is weightlifting. And I think a huge part of that is because of the circle of friends that I have that are my lifting buddies. And I tell them all the time, like, I don't know what I would have done without you guys. I know you don't know that. And it's probably, you know, it wasn't like I'd go and lift and talk about all these things that were going on. I would just go and lift and be a regular human being with them. And they would distract me from what was going on in my life. And I felt like I was doing something positive and accomplishing something.
Right.
And I think that the family that I have in that circle of people really made a huge difference for me. So that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Things I've done. One of the other things that I've done is I do spend a lot of time talking about what's happened.
Right.
You know, I try and engage people. I try and do things at work that I think are going to be helpful for other people. I try and I've done a couple of things here recently. We had Daniel Sundahl come down and do a big photo shoot for all of us. Isn't he amazing?
Yeah.
He's probably one of the nicest guys I've ever. So, yeah, I feel like trying to help other people that are going through what I've gone through is a way for me to make some use of my pain.
Yeah.
To be able to, you know, make some good of it. So I try and focus my energy on that.
It's kind of cathartic.
It is.
I find it, yeah.
And I've always been very open and candid about what's happened to me. When people come up to me and say, can I ask you about this? And you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. And I basically say, listen, I'm pretty much an open book because I don't want you to ever feel like you're alone. I don't want you to ever feel like you're the only one that's going through this. And if I can talk to you about it, because and this is one of the things I wanted to talk about, I have forgiven myself for all the things that I have done. I have forgiven myself for the way that I've handled things.
That's a big hurdle.
Because it's the only way that I could move forward. It's huge. It's huge. And because of that, I no longer am ashamed of the things that I've gone through. So I want to talk to people about it because I don't want them to feel like they're alone, because when you feel like you're alone, that's when the demons start to really have power over you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about this. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh yeah, no, and so the other thing that I've been doing also is I started a charity about 7 years ago.
Yes, that's what I want to talk about. Go ahead.
Yeah. So before I even went on disability, I could see that there was a need for activities for people with disabilities, special needs, mental health problems, you know, sort of a big umbrella for those things, because I could see that in society, they really got left behind a lot of the time. You know, lots of, we have no problem throwing funding at homeless people or at, you know, big diseases, but when it comes to looking after our people, our population with special needs, we really don't put as much focus and don't spend as much time and don't give as much money to those areas. And I used to volunteer at a place that's close to what I do, and that sort of inspired me. So what we do is equine assisted therapy for adults and kids with all types of disabilities. So that could be, you know, mental, emotional, physical, you name it. I basically created it because I realized that my outlook on life was so negative that the only way that I was going to change that was to change my view, to change physically what was in front of me.
Right.
So if I can create an environment where people feel loved and accepted, wouldn't that go a long way to also helping me feel loved and accepted and to have something to look forward to? So, you know, I'm one of those people that I like to advocate for the underdog. If I see something is wrong or I see someone's not being taken care of the way they should, I'll go to the ends of the earth to fix that problem. And I saw this as a problem, and I had a solution for it. And that's sort of what's driven me. And so now we're at the point where we're expanding all of our programming. Wow. And one of the big things we're looking at doing is setting up a program for first responders as well. And I know that there are other programs out there that are doing that right now. And that's awesome, and I'm glad it's available. But it is definitely one of the things that we're looking at doing in the near future here.
So what's it called? What's it? Is there a name for it? For your charity?
Yeah, it's Prairie Sky Equine Assisted Therapy.
Prairie Sky.
And yeah.
Is there a website or a page that we can look up?
There will be a website shortly.
Perfect. Let us know when it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just working on getting that set up. But we do have a Facebook page.
Okay.
And it's also called Prairie Sky Equine Assisted Therapy. And there's a little rainbow horse on the icon, and that's how you know you've gotten to the right page.
Perfect.
But we do a lot of our updates and talking about our programming and what's going on, current events, all that sort of thing gets done on our Facebook page. So
awesome. Before we begin to wrap up this chat, I want to talk to you because one of the other guests on this episode is Teresa Coulter. Supremely special human being. And
very special human being.
And you actually were one of the portraits in Sock Drawer Stories.
Yeah.
So you actually sat for that. What was the experience like sitting for that?
Well, I think one of the biggest things about Teresa that people should know is that you immediately feel safe with her. She's like a very soft place to kind of fall into because of her demeanor, because of the way that she chooses her words very, very carefully. She controls her energy, so to speak, very, very carefully. And I've always trusted her. So that was one of the things is, can I go in here and be vulnerable with you and trust that I'm going to be okay and that this isn't going to be used for anything other than what it's supposed to be, which is to bring awareness to what we're going through.
Right.
And I knew without a doubt, like I didn't even hesitate when she asked me to do it. And part of it was purely curiosity on my part. I wanted to see how she saw me as a little bit of self-reflection. I thought this would be a really great opportunity. And then I also knew that this might be a very cathartic experience for other people, and that if I went first and I agreed to do it and I did it, that other people might feel more comfortable coming forward and doing it as well.
So what were the thoughts through your mind when you saw the finished product and you saw your portrait?
I just wanted to give that person a hug. you can see it in my eyes how much pain and suffering was going on in there, how much shame, how much sadness. And I really just wanted to give that person a hug. I think she was really able to capture all of the emotions and feelings because there's so many of them. She was able to capture it all in one portrait. So I was really amazed when I saw it.
It sounds like it would have been an amazing experience to go through.
It was. It was really cool because, like I said, she is so kind and so just very, very caring and nurturing. And so when you're talking about your story, you can talk about it in a way of this happened. It's no longer happening, but it happened without feeling re-traumatized. And I thought that was really important. And I know that she was very careful about that. And when she made very conscious decisions around her project to make sure that it wasn't going to be something that was re-traumatizing to people. And I think she did a very amazing job in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it seems so. I mean, I got to see a little bit of it, and thank you for your work in The Other Side of the Hero. That's when I sort of saw a little bit of that Sock story, and I saw a little bit of you and Teresa. And it was that, I mean, that documentary's amazing. Anybody that hasn't seen it, you have to go out and see it. If you are a first responder or are married to one or know one, you need to see that documentary for sure. And you did a great job on it.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
That's the alarm.
What is that?
Talk to you. That was my alarm, making sure that I was ready to talk to you at 5:30.
I know, yeah, we were a little bit early. You started early.
No, it's great. This is great.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned the Facebook page for Prairie Sky.
Yeah.
Is there any other way that people can reach out to you? Any other Facebook contacts or links? Anything at all? You can throw it out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, so you can get a hold of me on Facebook. It's Jessica Vanderhoek. My last name is VAN space DER space HOEK. And you should see me and my dog in a Daniel Sundahl picture there. That's my cover photo. So that's how you'll know it's me. I'm in my uniform. And you can also find me on Instagram, Jessica Vander _Hook, HOEK, and that's me on Instagram. So those are both ways, and you can feel free to message me. I'm a very candid person, and I'm more than willing to talk to people about my experience. So
that's great.
Yeah,
that's exactly what we need.
Me.
I mean,
yeah,
we have to have more people like you, and I think it's coming. I mean, there are more and more people that are coming to the forefront and are talking. So I know little by little it'll happen. You're definitely doing your part to help, and I thank you for that. If there's anybody listening now that is struggling, going through a hard time, what will your message be to them right now?
I would have to say one of the things that I had a very hard time believing was that it was going to get better. Even up till, I'm going to be totally honest with you, 2 weeks ago when people kept telling me it's going to get better. And I would say absolutely it's not. My life is always going to be this awful. And I have to tell you, and this is something that everybody says, but it's going to get better. It might take a long time, but it's going to get better. And one of the biggest things that you have to do for yourself in the meantime is forgive yourself for all of the things that you judge yourself for the way that you've reacted to things, for the decisions that you've made, and be kind to yourself, because nobody else is going to do that for you but you. So I think once you're able to, like I spoke to earlier, forgive yourself for the things that have played out and to stop being so judgmental and so hard on yourself, because I believe we are. I believe we're extremely hard on ourselves. And I don't think that gets us anywhere. I know it hasn't for me personally. And I think forgiving myself is one of the best things that I've been able to do, because it's allowed me to let go of a lot of shame. And I don't believe that shame is a productive thing in your life. I don't think it serves a purpose. I think learning from things, absolutely. Shame, I don't. So be kind to yourself and forgive yourself for all of the things that you judge yourself for, because you're doing the very best you can. And you have to keep telling yourself that when things are as bad as they get, you're doing the very best you can with the resources that you have. So
well
be
said,
kind to
sister,
yourself.
for sure. Thank you for that. Now, we were talking about it. There's more support that needs to start happening out west. You said that there really isn't much out there right now. We need to work on that. I'm more than willing to help and hook you up with any any contacts that I have that we can start some movements out there, more than you guys are already doing now. And I know you and Teresa are doing a lot in your areas. Thank you for the compliment that you gave me earlier, that that you see a lot of stuff coming out of the East Coast. I know.
Absolutely. You guys are way further ahead than we are. Yeah, it's paying off. Because we see it and we're like, please take us with you.
Oh, you're already invited. Like you're there. You're good. And we'll definitely, anything that we can do. I want to thank you, Jessica, for taking the time to talk. I've enjoyed it very much, and you're one of these mental health superheroes that we have right now, and I love you. I love what you're doing. We're our own little support group of people that are trying to lead this conversation.
Yep, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing that I want to stress to people is you're not alone. So please stop feeling ashamed for where you are at in your life, because as low as you are, I guarantee you that there's more of us that are sitting down there with you. And if we could just reach out to each other and say, I'm in the worst place in my life, and not feel ashamed of where we're at, and then be able to talk about the fact that, we're having problems with our finances, we're having problems with addictions, we're having problems with suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
That it takes some of the power away from those things. So if we can just be kind to ourselves, reach out to others, I think that that's going to go a long way to make some real progress in fighting against this.
I totally agree. Thank you again for Jessica. It's been a pleasure, an honor, and I'm blessed to know you. And if there's anything else we can ever do for you, if you have anything new pop up, any new movements or projects or anything you want to tell us about, please let us know, and we'll have you back on, or I'll at least mention it on a podcast and put up links when I can if there's anything new.
Absolutely. And I just want to let you know how much I appreciate that you've created this forum for those of us to talk. Like, to be able to get out there and reach a large crowd doing something like this is amazing. And I think that what you're doing is having a huge impact on people. And for people to be able to access this from their own homes and to be able to do it in a way that's comfortable for them is amazing. So please pat yourself on the back for having the courage to and the follow through to do something like this, to give those of us like me that want to talk the ability to do so, and those of us that want to hear the ability to do so. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You take care of yourself.
Thank you. We'll chat soon.
Absolutely.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey there, I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. I want to take a minute and tell you about a special event happening on September 16th, 2017 in Summerside PEI. It is the Breaking Barriers First Responder Mental Health Symposium. It takes place at the Loyalist Lakeview Resort and Conference Center in Summerside and has been put together by Tara Vazel, who is a paramedic in PEI, formerly a paramedic in Nova Scotia, formerly a peer of mine. This is actually the second year for the event, and I feel like it's just about to blow up. It recently announced a partnership with TEMA, which is awesome, and is also brought to us by the Paramedic Association of Prince Edward Island. There's lots of events going on. It starts on September 15th with a fundraiser with some vendors present, silent auction, some music, and some comedy, some live comedy. So that sounds awesome. Then we get into it, September 16th, and Tara has put together a star-studded lineup of speakers. We have Natalie Harris, as you may know as a former guest of the podcast, and the Wings of Change support group founder, and also author of Save My Life School. We have Dr. John Whalen, ex-military and psychologist, author of Going Crazy in the Green Machine. He's going to be awesome. We also have Lisa Rouse, who's a 911 dispatcher and a police dispatcher. We have Julia Summers, who is a New Glasgow firefighter and paramedic. Daniel Sundahl himself is going to be there, taking some pictures, talking to people, doing what he does awesomely. Syd and Judy Gravel are going to be present and speaking. You may remember Syd as a former guest as well on the podcast, and he's about to have a new book out, When PTSD Entered Our Home. Also is the author of 56 Seconds and How to Survive PTSD and Build Peer Support. This guy is the godfather of peer support in Canada. You need to come out and hear him. My brother and good friend Tyler Anstey, police officer in Halifax, organizer of an event later in the year called The Big Hike. Crazy good guy. Love him. Come out and hear him speak. And then also we have Vince Savoya from Demacontra Memorial Trust, who will also be speaking. This is a crazy lineup. Crazy, crazy lineup. It's going to be so awesome. So please, if you haven't registered, you need to get there now. And you need to go to www.tema.ca/copy of events. For the Friday night fundraiser, it's only $15 to register. And for the Saturday symposium, it's $40. However, you can register for both for $50. Also, heard a rumor that emceeing this event is going to be me. So it'll probably be the most boring part of the event for you, next to these speakers. But I will be there, emceeing the event, introducing speakers, talking to people, trying to spread love. So come out and see me, come out and see all these awesome speakers, support this event, and let's make it one of the biggest events in Canada. Hope to see you there. Last, but certainly not least, is my brother, Hal Hughes. Police officer, pillar of Project Trauma Support, awesome dude, trying to spread support groups all over this great nation. I hope you enjoy the chat. I loved it. Let's welcome Hal to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, brother. It's an honor to have you.
It's great to be here.
Thanks, Hal. So this is awesome. I've been wanting to talk to you. I haven't talked to you since I was at the cohort in December of last year. You definitely had a big impact on my life and my experience there. And ever since then, I wanted to get you on to have a chat because I think other people can benefit from, from what I saw in you. Just really excited to have this chat.
Me too, man.
So for those of us who don't know you and your superhero-ness, tell us your origin story about, your upbringing and, up to the point where you got involved with Project Trauma Support.
Yeah, okay. So should I start at the fetus stage and work up, or maybe I'll skip a few chapters. So
Yeah.
I get into policing 14 years ago. Before that, I was in federal corrections for a brief stint.
Okay.
That's an awful go. I recommend to your listeners don't get into corrections. It's a rough life. Anyways, I got into policing. Was having a great career. I was kind of a go-getter. I was kind of the guy that rushed to the calls and didn't shy away from anything. Right. And then in 2008, I got rear-ended, pardon the expression, in my cruiser by a truck going about 50 miles an hour. My head hit the steering wheel, suffered a traumatic brain injury, diagnosed with severe PTSD at that time as well. And my whole life kind of crumbled. I've been sort of a high achiever up to that point in my life. I was heavy into martial arts as well, my black belt in jiu-jitsu, and was on the verge of turning professional in MMA. And then this happened. So within about 6 months, I went from high-functioning police officer, high-functioning dad, I'm a father of 4, high-functioning fighter to, drinking a lot, gained about 40 pounds, couldn't leave my house, was too anxious to even, go get groceries or go to the gym. I stopped training, and I had severe migraines. I was stuck in bed 4 or 5 days a week, just sleeping 20 hours a day, and eventually just became suicidal. Didn't want to live anymore. And was kind of about in the darkest place you could be as a human being, about ready to cash in my chips. And then turning point for me was a conversation my wife was having with my 4-year-old son at the time, and she was telling him that, trying to explain to him because of the brain injury and the PTSD why daddy wasn't the same,
Right.
Why daddy couldn't tuck him in at night, and why daddy couldn't play with him, and why daddy couldn't. And my 4-year-old just looked at me and he said that he wanted his real daddy to come home. He didn't think I was the same daddy. And, the dream's big enough, the facts don't count. And it's amazing when you have a huge dream and a huge reason why to get better or why to do anything, you can overcome any obstacles that you've created in your own mind. And even though the doctor said I was, at that point, they'd labeled me 20% permanently disabled and said I'd probably never work again, let alone put on the uniform again. Within 8 months from the time my son said that to me, I was back to work full time, kicking ass and taking names again. So, something any of your listeners hearing out there, anytime a doctor tells you can't do this, or anytime anyone in their lives tells them they can't do something, that's one story. That's one possible version of reality, but it's usually not the accurate one. And so anyways, I got back to my life, and then 3 years after that, almost to the day, I was in the emergency room of a hospital dealing with a violent male at work, and he attacked me and knocked me unconscious and caused a severe traumatic brain injury with bilateral frontal lobe lesions was the MRI results, and the neuropsych testing results were diffuse cerebral inhibition dysfunction, which I said to the neurosurgeon, well, what does that mean? You know, bilateral frontal lobe lesions and diffuse cerebral dysfunction, like speak to me like a regular person.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, you're fucked. I said, okay, I understand that language. So it sort of was written a sentence of you won't do any kind of work again and expect a diminished quality of life. So I bought into that, ended up getting prescribed some opiates for the migraines, and within a short order of that, I was addicted to opiates, doing huge quantities of opiates. Got them wherever I needed to get them. My script was for just a few pills a month, and I was doing handfuls of pills at a time, several times a day. So ended up going down a dark road with that too, and with you know, when you're a drug addict, you end up hanging out with people that do drugs, right. You know, and those aren't cops, those are other druggies. Yeah. So that was kind of a dark thing too. And around that same time, I got diagnosed bipolar as well. So I got put on a heap full of antipsychotics and mood stabilizers and benzos and every psychiatric drug you could imagine, to the point where I was pretty much a zombie. I was, again, at the point where I was ready to check out. I had my plan. I got a motorcycle that'll go 170 kilometers an hour, and I thought many nights I was driving along the edge of the pavement and the gravel, ready to turn the wheel, just a slight turn and hit the gravel and end it. There's many nights I can remember doing that, driving down the highway. I didn't want to live. And then, segue into Project Trauma Support, I met a doctor named Manuela Joannou, and everything changed. That was just over a year ago.
It seems to be anybody that meets her, that seems to be the story. That's where your life changes.
It was, and it was, for me, it was through kind of, 6 degrees of separation. It was 3 degrees of separation. My wife knows her best friend, and they got me an appointment just to see her. My first doctor's appointment with her, she spent 2.5 hours with me listening. And then shortly after that, she was putting on the first Canadian 5-day program here. Right. And I went through the program. That was a year ago, May. I literally went from not wanting to live to basically feeling unstoppable in my life. Everything completely turned around from that point forward, where I just took my life back, and I'm happy.
Just tell us a little bit more about your experience when you went through Project Trauma Support, and then what you do with them now.
Yeah, so when I went through the program, I was terrified and I was anxious just to be there. Even show up and get out of my car was hard. Yeah. And then in very short order, you're put at ease. And you realize you're in the right place. You're surrounded by guys that are from similar backgrounds, policing, fire, paramedic, military, and with similar stories, with identical pain and suffering. So there's a calming effect there, where you realize you're in a place. I think essentially the biggest thing is where you're not going to be judged, where no one's going to look down at you, think ill of you because you're struggling. And so when you start to feel comfort like that, you're suddenly able to be really honest and vulnerable, which is the key to connection. So because that's a key connection, you're able to love and connect again, and ultimately that's the answer for the way out of the darkness, is love and connection. That's the answer to all our problems when you really root down to it. So yeah, you basically get infused with love for 5 days, and you also get some tools and some strategies and a lot of psychology for how to deal with any problems going forward. Once I get out of that program right away, I started a peer support group in Smiths Falls, and a lot of nights that was just me showing up there every week, and then it slowly built, and it got to the point where 25, 30 people would show up from all over. So we kind of realized, well, Smiths Falls is a little town, this isn't going to cut it. So we started one in Ottawa, then we started one in Kingston. Then we got one started in Bowmanville, then another one in Fort McMurray, and another one in Guelph, Ontario. And so the plan now is to just kind of have it set up like AA, where any first responder or military person who's suffering the effects of PTSD needs a place to go on a Tuesday night in any city in Canada. They can, go online, look it up, and go, I'm struggling. Oh, there's a meeting, downtown Victoria tomorrow night, 7:00. I'll go there. Right. So there's always a place for these warriors to go where they can feel the healing power of tribe.
Absolutely. You mentioned, throughout my time with you, when I was at my cohort, I found you very inspirational. You had all these really awesome quotes and stories, and of course, more love, less judgment. I still say that to myself every day. That you taught me. And on this episode as well is Jessica Vanderhook, And I don't know if you know her or not, but she dropped a quote on me that I think you'll love, and you may already know it, that anger is the bodyguard of sadness.
Yeah, it's good. That's a great quote because it's true. It's anger is usually just a mask for fear or sadness, almost always. Or both.
Yeah.
And that's just how it presents itself. But if you ask someone who's angry, if you ask them enough times, like, what's really going on, you keep asking them questions, you'll eventually come down to, ultimately, even beyond fear and sadness, usually anger represents loss. That's usually what it is. And the thing with anger, the thing with any of these negative emotions is we tend to, and a lot of psychotherapists, which I completely disagree with, get into this notion of that you can somehow master your emotions, master your negative emotions,
Right.
Master anxiety, master anger, master sadness, master any of these things. You can never master those things. That's like me telling you to close your eyes right now and not see a white horse. What's in your head right now, Sean?
Yeah, white horse.
Yeah, it's the same thing when you're trying to master anger or master sadness. It's like shadow boxing. You'll get tired and sweat and get upset, but you don't actually get rid of it or master it. You can't master it. But what we can learn to master is the positive emotions. Emotions are created. They don't happen to us. That's one of the biggest lies we need to get over in our heads, is that this shit just happens to us, like fear and anger. They just happen to us. No, we create them. We do very specific things, or physiology or mental focus, to make these emotions be created and happen. So what we can master is creativity, decisiveness, courage, passion, honesty, sincerity, love. These positive emotions, we can learn how to master those, and those will displace the negative ones. Love can displace anger. Creativity and decisiveness can overcome and displace anxiety. And there's very specific things we can learn to do with our body, with our physiology, with our language, our facial expressions, our posture, our breathing, and then our mental focus to create those positive emotions. So that's what we need to learn to master. And there's no point in our lives are we ever given a course, are we ever sent to a conference, are we ever given a test on how to manage our emotions, yet our very happiness depends on it. Everything we do to feel a certain emotion. Whether you say, I want to be married, why do you want to be married? If you keep asking, why? It comes down to, I want to feel a certain way. Why do you want to go on a trip? Because you want to feel a certain way. Why do you want to have a certain occupation? Because you want to feel a certain way. You want to feel a certain emotion. Yet we're not taught anything in our lives about how to manage our emotional state. We're under the notion that good things happen, we'll feel great. Bad things happen, we'll feel shitty. Well, you better hope you have a lot of good things happen to you. Otherwise, you're going to be shit out of luck in terms of how you feel, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Fuck that shit.
Yeah.
Fuck that. I control my emotions. I create them in any moment in time. That doesn't mean I'm not going to feel pain or anger or sadness for short periods of time.
Right.
Sure. But then I get right back to managing my state. I don't live there. We tend to all have an emotional center of gravity that we always vibrate or oscillate back to in our lives. Angry people, in any situation, no matter what happens, they'll find a reason to be angry. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Happy people find a reason to be happy. Sad people find a reason to be sad. People find their emotional center of gravity, and they'll always focus on something and attach a meaning to it to get back to that center of gravity. What I'm suggesting to people when we go on these cohorts is adjust that center of gravity. Why not choose happiness over anger? But the answer to that question is it's really fucking easy to be depressed and angry and sad. That's our natural bent. Our natural, as humans, genetically, the way that we evolved, if you didn't step outside the cave and if you weren't anxious and a little bit worried about what happened yesterday, a little bit depressed, then what happened? If you were all nonchalant, you got eaten by the fucking tiger, right?
Yes.
Whereas, so we naturally have to fight against that natural tendency to be anxious and depressed. We got to fight against that darkness every day by doing things we need to do to be positive, which is putting positive stuff in your head, eating a healthy diet, exercising, meditating, all those positive things to counterbalance the darkness,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really what Project Trauma Support was about. That's one of the surprising things, the pleasant surprises I found with the cohort was we didn't focus on the things that actually happened to us, because we all have there were different situations, but a similar story and a similar outcome. So we moved past that and went on to the moral injuries, exactly what you're talking about, all these feelings, these emotions that come with all this shit that we don't learn to deal with or that we haven't learned to deal with. And that's what we talked about. And that's what we tried to change. And that's the big difference I find with Project Trauma Support. That's what makes it unique and effective.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Sean. And the reason why that we don't get into that, to talking about the traumas and stuff, is it serves no purpose. Right. It really serves no purpose. But what's really interesting is when you tell guys, okay, like, don't go to the dark place. Let's talk about your top game instead. Talk to us about when you're at your absolute best in life, when you're unstoppable. We've all been in that zone before, and you get guys talking about that. But after about a minute, they gradually start to slide and their story starts to naturally go back to the shit again. Why do we do that? And Dr. Marcus Beesman, who's one of the leaders of our team, yes. He's the head of all rehab medicine for the military services in Canada. Just an unbelievable human being, right? Yeah, and I love he uses the metaphor of shooting up like a heroin addict, that as humans, we shoot up on this negative shit because the human brain doesn't give a fuck whether you're in euphoria at the top of the scale and happiness or at the bottom rooting around in the horse shit and the darkness. It doesn't care. It just wants to feel extremes one way or the other. So Dr. Marcus has this great metaphor that, it's like a needle that we just shoot up on this negative crap. So people will naturally always drift back to that place where they start shooting up on the shit again. And you have to remind them when we're at the cohort, not to go back there. No. We're not shooting up on that shit again. Right. We're going the other direction,
Yeah, absolutely. And once you get into that mindset, which doesn't take very long, like once you feel comfortable as soon as you're around all those guys, and once you get into that and you, as you would say, you lean in, once you lean in and engage in the process, it's transforming. It's life changing. It was for me. It's one of the key pillars that saved my life. And I love it. That's why I love all you guys so much.
That's great. And it's, like you said, it doesn't take too long, right, to kind of make that shift. And it's, when you think about the negative stories we tell ourselves and we share with our friends, which is really fucked up, it's almost like watching a horrible movie, like a movie that makes you feel sick, nauseous, anxious, angry, depressed, sad. So you watch this really sad, awful movie that makes you feel sick to your stomach, and then you go to your friend and go, here, come watch this movie with me. Yeah. It's fucking insanity, right? And not only that, you know what, tomorrow morning I'm going to get up and watch this shit again.
Yeah.
And that's all we're doing in our heads is we're replaying this horrible fucking movie. And the thing as human beings is the movie isn't even accurate most of the time. We're blaming ourselves for things that we had no control of. We're feeling guilty over things that we couldn't have changed. We're feeling awful about shit that hasn't even happened yet. We're writing movies in our head about the future that aren't even true. How insane is that, right? But so we make this shift at the program, and it can be life changing. But what a lot of people, which you probably notice too, is when you leave the program, you're on a real high.
Yes.
And a lot of people across time will slide back down again to that center of gravity of their emotional state if they don't embrace the habits, the daily habits and rituals they need to fight against that darkness.
Absolutely. I mean, I've strayed away from it many times since I left and had to consciously tell myself, push myself to go back there because I'm aware of it, which is good, which is great, but you have to, it's a constant effort, as it should be, to keep yourself in that positive light.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not about, it's not about positive thinking. I'm not big into it's not about, people get into this whole thing. Is this positive talk? Like, not really. It's reality talk. Right. I'm not into, looking in the garden and saying there's no weeds when it's full of fucking weeds, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's delusion. I don't want to be deluded. I just want to be accurate. But I want to see the world as it is, and then I want to have a vision for it being a lot better, right, and something I can move towards, right? And that's, the more love, less judgment thing came out of an incident with a guy, and the no judgment basically means just see the world as it is, see people as they really are, but it came out of an incident where the guy that attacked me in the hospital and caused permanent brain damage, maybe I'll share this story because it's kind of a powerful one. I think it's important for your listeners if they're looking to, a lot of people in emergency services have incidents, and they hold a lot of anger and they're unable to forgive people. Sometimes it's people within their own organizations, leaders in their organizations, or people that have harmed them. So I'll just share this quick story. The guy that hurt me, the Crown Attorney set up a prejudicial meeting with me and him, and it's essentially see if he can bypass a trial court system. And so what it is it's the victim, in this case it was me, who happened to be a police officer, and the accused, and you sit around in what's called a community justice forum. In the policing world, behind closed doors, we call it a circle jerk. And basically what it is you tell your side of the story as the victim, how it impacted you and your family, and then they get a chance to tell their side of the story, and you bring any friends and family you want in as your support. Well, no one came with me because my wife was way too angry at this guy because he'd basically stolen her husband back, who she had lost from the previous injury for 2 years of her life and her kids' lives, and so she couldn't come. And so it was just me. So I'm sitting, and it's literally in a circle of chairs, and he brought all his friends and family. There was about 10 or 12 of them. So I'm just sitting in this chair staring at the floor telling my story about how it impacted me and my kids and my wife and how I had permanent brain damage and how I'm just staring at the floor, and I'm just full of anger, and I'm just full of judgment towards this guy, right? He's evil. He's a piece of shit. All this story I built up in my head about this guy. And then I hear the noise across the room, and I just ignore it, and it kind of builds and it kind of spreads to the point where finally I kind of come out of this haze of telling my story, and I look up. There he is, sobbing. Yeah. So is his friends and family. They're all crying, but not just crying, like they're bawling at my story. And so, change doesn't happen like a dimmer switch on a light. It happens like an on-off. And right then I changed. Right then and there I embraced the principle and I lived my life by. And I get up and I walked across the room and I told him to stand up. And I'm pretty sure I thought I was going to punch him in the fucking throat, Yeah. And I'm pretty sure he would have leaned into it, because it would have made him maybe feel better. Yeah. But I didn't. I hugged him. Told him I loved him, and I said more love, less judgment. And that's how that whole principle in my life. And I forgave him. And I didn't just forgive him. I set it up for a year after that. He had to contact me once a month to talk to me so that he could share with me how his life had changed and how he had changed his life and gotten better, and just to let me know how he was doing as a human being. I made him have to have contact with me. It was written right into the prejudicial court order. Yeah. So that to me was, warriors, when they want to change their lives, warriors don't sit around and think about acting. Fuck that. A real warrior acts. We don't react. We act. Right. We choose with intent how we're going to lead our lives, and then we do it. And so for me to embrace the concept of more love, less judgment was an action. Right. Love is a verb. Less judgment, that's a verb. That's a form of verbiage. It's not about sitting around thinking about shit. It's about doing it. So I got the amazing opportunity because of that individual for my whole life to change and for me to establish a principle which I could base my whole life on because of what he did to me. So I was thankful for him. And the only debt I told him he had towards me was that he had to pay it forward. That the next time somebody wronged him, or the next time, even if it was just a little interaction with his wife over taking out the garbage, even if something like that happened to him, that I wanted him to remember me and think more love, less judgment. Because is there any situation in life where that would make things worse? Never.
So how is he doing? How did he do?
Yeah, he ended up, he was working full time in a industrial place, in a small town. He started going to AA, got cleaned up, so he'd stopped drinking. He was doing great. He became a friend of sorts to me. He got his life back. And that's the thing, we tend to build up people in our heads as being evil, and then you meet them, and an enemy is just someone whose story you haven't heard yet. And that's what it was with him. And so because I just showed a little bit of love, just a little bit of love in his whole life, that was a fork in the road for him. What if I dug my heels in with the Crown and said, fuck this guy? He would have been looking at some serious time for hurting a police officer, so he'd hurt me. But instead, he gets embraced with love, and probably he'll never forget that moment, the same as me in that room where we embraced,
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it now. I'm just picturing it in my head. Yeah. Not really any words to describe that. It's just, life-changing for sure. So, you guys are pumping out these cohorts now. How often are you having cohorts of Project Trauma Support?
Well, the funding is an issue, so they've been somewhat sporadic. So we've done 3 like in the last few months, and we've got another one coming up starting today.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Are you going to be visiting them? Are you going to be involved with that?
This Sunday?
Yeah, the one that's coming up.
Yeah, I'm just as soon as I'm done flapping my gums at you, I'm going to be heading out the door here. Actually.
Oh well, please give everybody my love when you see them. And
I will. Your name comes up often. It does. We think fondly of you, and we love what you're doing with the podcast. You're making a difference, and that's what life's all about, right? Like life doesn't mean anything if we don't give something back. We grow so we have more to give others, and that's what you're doing, man. You're serving other people, and you're helping people with what you're doing. So kudos to you.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. I get to talk to cool people like you. How can people reach you if they want to reach out to you or have a question for you? Is there any way they can do that? Any kind of social media stuff?
I'm not really big on love and connection. I tend to isolate. I like to isolate myself. I have a crawl space under my first floor, and I go down in there with water and rice, and I tend to. So my name is Hal Hughes, 613-206-1345. That's my cell phone number.
Wow.
I don't give a shit who you are, where you're from, anytime, night or day. I'll answer people's calls if they need help with anything to do with mental illness. I got tons of experience at being an awful drug addict, someone with PTSD, brain injuries, anxiety, all that kind of stuff. So if anyone has any issues anytime, night or day, fire me a text or just call me directly, and I'll answer the call. And people always get all fucking weird, especially cops, about handing out their personal information, as if anyone can't go online and find it anyways. Who gives a shit? The crowd that you're speaking to are all people that, are good people with good intentions. And if someone with bad intentions reach out to me, I just ignore them. So I'm wide open to anybody reaching out to me. My purpose in life, beyond my family is to serve others, to help others. And my goal in life is just to reach out and love as many people as I can. And what love is essentially healing. So that's what I'm about. So anybody can reach out to me.
That is awesome. Thank you for that, brother. That's huge. Before I let you go, because I know you got to run off, if there's anybody listening right now that is struggling, and I know you know what that struggle feels like, I know what that struggle feels like, what would your message be to them?
Well, you want to use the word struggles, and I'll just tie it into one of the other things I live by. It's a principle of welcoming your struggles.
Okay.
The biggest problem most people have is they don't think they should have any fucking problems. Right? Yeah, we've all had that experience where some shitty thing happens to us, and then 6 months or a year later we go, wow, that was a blessing in disguise. What I would encourage people to do is just shorten that time gap. And as soon as the bad thing happens, just right then and there go, you know what? This is painful, but it's growing pains. Something good always comes out of something bad. And it's only through struggle. It's like going in a gym and working out. Only through that pain do you ever grow as a human being. And if you're not going to grow, you know the old saying, if you're not growing, you're dying. So welcome your struggles, people. As much pain as you're in now, it's your choice whether you turn it into suffering or not. And the formula for that is suffering is equal to pain times resistance. So stop resisting your struggles. Just know there's something on the other side of the darkness. You're not going through this for nothing.
Right.
And, and part of the magic of welcoming your struggles is when you start to embrace them, you stop fearing them. You stop building them up into these massive shadows that can have this control over you. You just accept it. You feel the pain, and you grow from it. And you move forward, and you do that with tribe.
Well said, brother. Thank you for those words, Hal. I love you. You were part of the group that changed and saved my life, and because of that, I will always be there for you guys. Anything you guys need. I can't say enough about you. I wanted this chat for the podcast, but I needed this chat for me as well. You have sort of helped me realign, and which I needed. I just thoroughly enjoyed this chat, and I can't thank you enough for sitting down and taking the time.
Well, thanks, Sean. I love you too, brother. And I'm glad that this talk helps me as well. Every time I talk, it goes out of my mouth in my own ears too. So I'm teaching myself at the same time. And all I can tell you personally from heart to heart is do not ever go back gently into that good night. Fuck that. Life is too short. Life is too short. We don't have time to go back to that dark place.
Yeah.
Fuck that. Fight the fight, my friend. And you're a strong, amazing human being. And I know that you're doing great things with this podcast, so just please keep up this great work that you're doing for your community and for your country, brother.
No, I definitely will. Until we get to see each other face to face again, please take care of yourself, hug your family, tell everybody at the cohort I love them, and we will chat again soon. And that's it. Another podcast done. Hope you loved it. I certainly loved making it. Big thanks to Teresa, Jessica, and Hal for coming on. Thank you to my sponsors. Thank you to Project Trauma Support for coming on as a title sponsor this year. Please check them out. Links are on the website, uptalkpodcast.com. I hope this podcast finds you all well and in a good place. And if it doesn't, I hope it's the start of you getting to that good place. Please take care of yourself and each other. More love, less judgment.
'Cause we ain't superheroes, we're just ordinary people trying to make a difference and the first on every scene. And it's a heavy head